Hey everyone, it's time for Opus 16 set review, and I am lucky and gracious to be joined by Jared Eureka Wallace. Jared, how are you, sir?
I'm doing great, and thanks for having me on as always. How about you?
Absolutely, I'm doing well too. So, a few little housekeeping things before we jump right into the set. The cards have not been officially released on the American card browser, so some of the images I have might be kind of grainy or might be from other sources, but I kind of just had to pull what I could from them. And if you're new to these reviews, we will be skipping over a few cards. Some of them are very similar, or like in each element they get one that's kind of similar. So just to kind of save time, we'll usually skip past those. But you can always ask in the comments and everything if you have questions about anything. Jared, are you ready to roll, sir?
Yeah, I'm ready. Let's go.
Excellent. Well, you know what the card we should start with is a card we've gotten in the past two sets, and this is Vaughn. Now, to be fair, this is a very different Vaughn from the other two, but it's still the third Vaughn that when I saw, I was like, wow, another Vaughn. Not gonna lie, I thought this was a forward when it first came in. He's in Fire finally. I feel like you definitely want to get his 8K entry because I don't really think you're going for the 3 costs. Like, I really don't know how to rate this card because, again, when I think of Vaughn, I just think of Sky Pirates. Like, I don't know, do you even run this in a mono fire list? But then it talks about casting cards increase the damage, so I have to admit, I'm not really sure what to think of this one.
Yeah, I think this is part of them doing a little bit to push Fire Wind. And so you can start just off of the 4 CP backup Penelo, and then when you have Philo out, then it can actually generate Fire, Wind, or Water. So you can generate, all 3 of the things that you kind of want to do with a cast. Because what you want to do with the casting stuff is you want to play mostly Wind cards, a few Fire cards, and then Primal Leviathan, right? So Vaughn kind of like helps you smooth that out, and I think there will probably be a Fire Wind deck that plays this Vaughn. Whether or not that's the best way to play Wind this set is kind of up for debate, but we'll probably see some of this. Even if he's just like a blank Fire backup with Job Sky Pirate, he's still good enough in that deck with the Philo out that we will see some of this card. And then if you can get some value off of the 8K damage or off of the S ability, that's just gravy.
Yep, backups with S abilities are always great. Great point about the Philo. I hadn't considered that. And next we have a cadet we just can't get enough of. I won't lie, when I first saw this card, I was like, it's a new cadet. Oh my god, it's Ace. So here's Ace. A theme for this set is just kind of these cards that reward you for playing a lot of multi-elements. And Ace is one of them. You would never play this Ace in with the other cadets because he's really not even tied to cadets. Again, he's tied to this multi-element thing. I've struggled to imagine what these multi-element decks are going to look like this set if we're going to try them. Ace, however, does seem like a decent payoff for those if you were to use them.
I think you have to play like a minimum of 3 elements. You have to reveal at least 3 elements with Ace, because just a 4 TP 7K that is 6K on entry is kind of not so great. So I think you kind of have to get at least 3 elements revealed. But if you can reveal at least 3 elements, then he does ATB 9K, which is pretty solid. Attack trigger, it feels like totally irrelevant. But if you have Chantoda out, then he gets a huge boost, So it's not completely irrelevant, but usually you want to be doing more. The fact that this has an X-Burst is also really nice, though. So if there is like some kind of like wacky multi-element deck, then Ace might be, as long as he's castable, he might be a nice part of it. Now, like what that actually looks like, because you have to play the characters to the field or keep them in your hand, I don't really know. So
yeah, good point. So next we have Elvis. He's our soiree member. We're going to get to all those later when we get to, I think her name's Edel or Etta. Next, we have an Onion Knight that at first I thought was just kind of a strange effect to be in fire, and I kind of didn't think much of it because I was just like, well, it kind of just reminds me of a black belt. However, there aren't actually a lot of Onion Knights in fire, so if the Onion Knight archetype or tribal is ever going to be a thing, this card could actually be kind of useful there, and it's one of those effects that, because of the way it's worded, it's nice that you could play him on an empty hand, dodge the negative part of discarding, and then just draw 2 cards.
yeah, I think this is maybe one of the best commons in the set for sure, and definitely standard playable card. Where this exactly fits in is kind of hard to say. I imagine because he has Job Warrior of Light that he'll be played in Warrior of Lights. It's just that deck doesn't really have any Knights that it wants to play. So it seems like a slam dunk in that deck because you can reduce the cost with Ferris too. So you can like play turn 1s, stare at FFL, search for Ferris and Onion Knight. Play the Ferris and then play the Onion Knight at reduced cost and draw 2 new cards if you're going second. That's the only time that works. The other job that he has is Sage, which is relevant for the really, really old, I believe, Opus 4 Onion Knight. He can job change into job Sage. So that also works with this card. It kind of seems more like a, gimmicky, fun strategy than a competitive strategy, but at least it's another target for this card besides the Opus 1 Lightning Onion Knight, which is just not cutting it in this day and age. So.
Yeah, great point
I think
about.
We'll see.
Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Well, I was just gonna say, great point about the warrior. I'm still getting used to like the double jobs. It's like, oh yeah, he is a warrior of light as well. So that's a really good point. Now, I know what you were, before we started the stream here, folks, Jared was telling me, you know what we don't have enough of in this game? Cloud cards. Well, don't worry, we got you covered. Here's another cloud. This one's just, I don't know. It's not that any of his effects are particularly bad. It's just, like, where do you run this card? Obviously, in any 7, even remote deck, you'll never pick this because you're running other clouds. I guess in title, we're almost to that mono cloud point, but I don't know. I don't really find any of his effects to be amazing either, and especially because he's named, like, maybe he wasn't named Cloud. Like, any thoughts on this guy?
Yeah, I think in title you'll play this card just because, like, you can choose your backup Jesse and then search like a forward Jesse or whatever. Like that seems pretty good. But in constructed, yeah, I'm on the same page as you. I have no idea where we're gonna play this card. It just doesn't really make sense to me. I'm sure somebody will find a niche use for it, but I'm sure even in those kinds of decks, it'll be like maybe a 1 of or a 2 of. So I don't have particularly high expectations for this card.
That's fair. All right, we got a new line of monsters. This is our Crimson Hound, and we'll kind of just talk about all these monster types here. They all have an on-entry effect related to their element, and then all of them, you can pay a single CP, put them in the break zone, and then you get to scry, look at the top 2 cards of your deck, either put them back on the top or the bottom, or split them up, however you want to do it. And definitely higher on the hero monsters, but we'll get to those in a moment. So these are, I mean, I don't know, these are like, I actually kind of like the scry effect. I like the idea that, it's cool to see, okay, they're coming in for a point of damage. You could technically stack, try to stack a burst if you've got one, or if you've got dead cards coming up, they're going to end their turn. I don't want to draw those. But it's stuff like this is that I don't think these cards are bad, but I feel like they always come down to deck space. And what are you going to cut from your very, particular 50 card slot to put one of these monsters in?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I'll probably talk about the ice one a little bit more when we get to that one, because it's kind of the most interesting of the bunch, and the wind one, I suppose. But yeah, these are for just like on their face value. Most of these cards are just not really playable in the modern day. Maybe if there's like an L3 format, this would be like a nice piece of removal that we could see being played. But L3 hasn't been played in years, so kind of wait for that, I guess.
Yeah, great point. Next, we have Black Waltz 2. We'll talk about him more when we get to the Legend and Lightning. And then here's a standard unit Black Mage. He's just kind of standard fodder, so we'll run past him as well. Yeah. Here we have a 4-cost Samurai. Man, they must love Samurai Tribal, because I was surprised how good this card is when I read it. So it's a 4-cost backup, but then it totally pays for itself later. One, it's a name Samurai, so you want to have it in Samurais just because, Cyan and Tenzin and all those guys want to see Samurais. And then he can play a 4-cost forward from the break zone, 4 cost or less, right onto the field. And if it happens to be a Samurai, it also does 2k to the board. So what I'm thinking probably the most probable target is the 3-cost standard unit Samurai. It comes in, boom, this will be in the break zone now too. So that'll be another Samurai for that one's trigger. I don't know if the 2k to the board will be as relevant there, but you could, it'll obviously have its entry nuke, and it limits it to your turn, but it doesn't say to your battle phase. So in theory, you could have Cyan do his cleave, then in the middle of that, or after it resolves or whatever, trigger this guy. Now you bring on another one, and now it has another 2k to add to that. Just like, whoo. Other tribals wish they got support like this.
I have some mixed thoughts about this. Obviously, the effect and the name are, quite good. These are things that you probably, if you have the luxury to do them, you would love to put this in and play this in Samurai. Now, I don't know if you're gonna be like cutting Gosetsu and stuff like that to put this in your deck. The backup slots in Samurai, if you go look at all the backups that you can run and all the backups that are in there, you're cutting like really, really good cards from Samurai to fit everything that you want to fit in there. Like the most popular lists right now don't even play the full set of 2CP Samurais. So I don't really know what you're gonna be cutting from that deck to put this card in. That being said, if you do find the space for it, I think it's got some great potential. Obviously, Cyan and the 3CP Samurai are the most obvious targets for it. You even get a card back if you bring Cyan back, and it might just be good enough bringing back Cyan and that Samurai alone that you are kind of forced to run at least one or two of these. But I don't really expect for this card to like revolutionize the way the deck plays or like be that have that big of an impact, all things considered.
Yeah, that's fair. All right, now we have the first of our hero monsters, and these I'm very high on. I really like this design, and I'll go more into this more on Biblios when we get to the ice one, because he's the one I'm most excited about. But so here we have the Jin. I love this Yoshitaka Amano art, and he's probably the one I'm the lowest on. So they all have this, they kind of have this passive ability for existing, and then they all have this damage 3. They turn into it 7,000 forward, and then do something when they attack. And my only thing with this guy is that I don't recall Fire having any issue like blowing stuff up these days, so I find his effect to be like a little but I guess maybe if you're ever in that situation where you have Terra or Ifrit or whatever your ping is and you're just a little short, Jin's gonna get you there. But again, like, I've played against a lot of Fire and I've never seen them struggling like, oh man, I just don't have enough damage.
Yeah, I think the biggest uses for the damage increase is like Rain and Sasano. So because this is a monster and not always a forward, it obviously it works really well with Sasano because you're not gonna kill the Jin and then you can also attack with Jin immediately after, and it'll push the Sasano up to 9k damage, which is kind of a big, or sorry, 10k damage, which is kind of a big break point. So yeah, I think it is a relevant effect. Now, is that the most important part of the card? Probably not. I think the damage 3 is quite like this kind of animating for free, becoming a 4 at 0 cost. Even if it's hooked to damage 3, I think that's just low enough of a cost that these cards are going to be really solid. So yeah, I'm pretty high on this card. There was, well, and all of the monsters in general. There were even some like mono fire builds that were playing Goblin, like the 2 CP monster that animates for free becomes a 5k and does nothing basically, just because animating for 0 cost is, and being a monster is really good. So yeah, I think we'll see this card and basically all of those monsters play it at some point, as long as it's something that the deck is even remotely interested in.
Yeah. All right, so now we're going to hit our first Fire Legend. We have Squall here, and I mean, I am the biggest fan of Yoshitaka Amano, but I have to admit, I don't really like this artwork. I have to agree with some people who say it doesn't really even look like Squall. That doesn't really make me think of Renoa. Obviously, they both have blonde hair, which we know the final characters don't. I'm assuming maybe this was like concept art for their great Dance Under the Moon, which I absolutely love that cutscene, but nonetheless, and then the card effect itself is, I mean, in its best case scenario, assuming all these conditions line up for you, like, I can see what they're thinking with this card. I can see that, like, if this all lines up for you, it's what are you gonna do? Because if you block, you take this big wave of damage, and then he's got first strikes, you're not gonna kill him. So they're thinking it's kind of like a board wipe. But man, there's just so many conditions, and of course you can't play this. How are you going to get their hand low in Fire other than crossing your fingers? So I'm assuming this is intended to be like a Fire Ice kind of mix card, but I don't know. I was certainly disappointed when I saw it. I was really hoping for a Mono Ice Squall, and this one's definitely let me down.
Yeah, I think so. One way to think about it is it's a mono ice, or it's a fire ice card, and I think that's where the card is really going to shine. But I do also think that if you just play like a really aggressive game, it's kind of easier to get yourself down to low cards in hand and make this card a threat. Because where this card really shines is when your opponent starts having to think about like blocking Squall, because if your opponent doesn't have to block Squall, like they're just at like 0 or 1 damage, then he's just kind of like a 4 CP 8k haste, which is not that interesting. It's not something that we would be going out of our way to play for. Where it really shines is like once your opponent is like at 4 or 5 damage and you play Squall and your opponent, you swing with it, you deal 4k, and your opponent is like sitting there, even if they have cards in their hand, they if they have like 3 forwards on board, they can't really block it, and that's when it gets to be better. So I think if there's a deck that can kind of force these situations of you put your opponent to a lot of damage relatively early, and then you kind of force your opponent into choosing between taking more damage or blocking Squall and letting you get the board wipe off. That's where this card is really going to shine. Are those decks going to be top tier? Or is that going to be an easy kind of situation to make? That I'm not so sure about. But if it is, then I think Squall will definitely be good. So it's one of those cards to kind of keep your eye on and not kind of totally shut out. But do I think this is like the best legend of the set? Well, probably not.
Yeah. Well, I hope it lives up to what you're saying, because I was definitely disappointed. So I hope it proves me wrong. We have Suzaku next. Do you want to talk about the Shijin, or do you want to wait till like Kirin and then mention them all together?
Yeah, well, let's talk about them all with Kirin.
Okay.
Yeah.
Next, we have Suzaku. We'll talk about that when we get to Kirin. Next, we have a new Soul. This was a surprise. I recently played through Final Fantasy Legends. I really liked that game, and so I kind of have an affection for these characters. Really like this artwork. So this is one of our, I think this is the first card we've had that mentions crystals. And so, when he enters, you can pay your crystal. You can play any forward of 4 or less from your hand. It's not limited to Warriors of Light, even though he is. And it's kind of neat. He can generate you crystals anytime you party attack, and then you can always just pay 1 to do 2,000. I have to admit, I'm still just not really sure how to rate a lot of these crystal cards, because just as a mechanic, having played in whole Opus with it now, I personally still find it somewhat inconsistent, especially depending on the elements you're in. And, I mean, the other Souls were good too, but then again, a single crystal, dropping another one for free, man, playing Ferris for free, that would feel really good. So I'm kind of high on this card, but crystals always just make me go like, I don't know how to rate these.
Yeah, I think... and I said this at the start of Opus 15 when we were doing the set review with crystals. Like, crystals are difficult to use when you don't have a lot of ways to generate them and you don't have a lot of ways to use them. But if you have both of those, a lot of ways to generate and to use them, then I think they're quite good. And so I think that Soul is I'm pretty high on it. I think it's good for the Warrior of Light deck because Barth just gives you like a million crystals. You know, like, if you have the Barts out and you play this, you're going to get another crystal to immediately use the effect, and then you can bring in Ferris or whatever, who will give you another crystal because of Barts, and then when you party, you'll get another crystal. So, yeah, I think Soul is really good in that deck. I also think it'll be good in Fire, Water, like Vikings, like those party decks.
Yeah.
That deck is really good at drawing cards, and it kind of always wanted to play like Mog 6, because that just works really well with what it's doing. It's a very cheap threats. You get a lot of value out of it, but it didn't really have a lot of the ways to generate crystals. And even if you did put in all of the crystal generating backups, the only way to use those crystals was with the Mach 6. And so it kind of fell to the bottom there. I think with Soul, you both using the crystals and generating more crystals for you when you do the thing that you already want to do, which is, party attack, that's going to be a really big buff to that deck. And you'll also be able to use the pay crystals to pay a 4 ability, because that deck tends to run all the Ferrises, and you can get Layla out there for free, which is really good. And there's just like a lot of good options there, I think. So I expect to see a lot of this card. Whether or not it's top tier, that's something to be debated. But in Warrior of Light and in the Firewater Vikings deck, and if there's any other Fire Party decks, I do expect to see a lot of this card.
Excellent. We will see everyone's Soul coming into these. Well, moving from Soul to Machina 2.0. Oh, I'm sorry. I mean Delita. I'm sorry. That's all I could think of when I read this card. I was like, isn't this just the Machina card we just got in this last set? And I feel similar to Machina that I do for Delita, in that the amount of damage he does just doesn't seem that great for his cost. And obviously, I don't know, in that effect too, like that you can remove a forward to bump him by 2,000, like that's it. I'm going to lose a whole 4. I mean, I don't know, maybe again in some like Viking deck where, well, it was going to die anyway, so now I'll get like double damage or double benefit, but I don't know. I'm just not feeling it with this card.
Yeah, I think it's okay. It's really fragile, right? So if you play the Delita and you want to use the bottom ability to remove the cards that you assume, right, are going to die anyways, to buff his damage, to bring it up to, say, 8,000, which is kind of, the break point that you would expect Delita to be good. Your opponent can just, like, stack Porum effect or Kuchulain and, like, remove the ability of the Delita to increase his damage. And so it'll only deal 4k at that point. So it's very easy to disrupt his ability. Also, they could just kill the Delita before the damage resolves, and then he won't be on the field, so his damage won't get increased. Um, so yeah, it's a really easy to disrupt card. But at its most powerful, if you kill like two of your own fours that were going to die anyways, and you get to blow up your opponent's whole board, and you get like 4 crystals in the process, that seems really good. Now, is that really? Are you gonna slot this card in something? And do I think it really makes a cut? Probably not.
Yeah, fair. We got some more great mono artwork here with Morrow. And this one, all about the party. And so when I was reading those, I was like, ooh, is this like Bart's Boko? But Bart's Boko is usually wind water. I don't know if I've ever seen it go too far out of that. Plus, he's not a 1 CP. Yeah. This is another one that's like, I don't know. I've seen how explosive some of those kind of party-S decks could be with something like Noctis, maybe something with like Ferris and the Vikings. And I like the damage 5 ability. It's always neat that just by declaring the party, you can deal them a point of damage. But I don't know. Like, I always have trouble rating these cards. How do you see Morrow?
Yeah, so I think Mara is quite good. So a lot of the party decks, they kind of lack inherent haste. They rely on either, cheat bodies, which is, Vikings, or they rely on some like sturdy bodies that shut the opponent down, which is like Celeste in Ice. And I think Mara fits in pretty well with both of those because a big problem with Celeste was that like you just couldn't stick 2 of the bodies to the field to get a party going. But with Morrow, you can just play Morrow and then immediately party with Celeste because he can party with anybody. So, and that'll be, I think, really good for, a Fire Ice party deck potentially. And then also, obviously, in Vikings, this is just a slam dunk card. It just gives you another haste. You can party with your Vikings, so you don't have to worry about them removing like 2 of the Vikings, and you just have like 1 little idiot sitting there on the board. And you get a nice little discard 1, draw 2, which is obviously fantastic. It's like drawing a card, but even better. So yeah, I do expect to see a lot of this. It also works very well with Mog 6. So going back into the Firewater Vikings, playing the crystals, drawing those extra cards is going to make Mog 6 break something instead of just bouncing into the hand. So yeah, I think this card is great. I think it lives and dies on the party, so if the party decks aren't good, this card is kind of, whatever. But in those decks, I think it'll be great.
Great synergy with the Mog 6. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah.
Next, we have this first line of 7 summons that are all from Final Fantasy VII, and I was kind of shocked to see this card because I was like, didn't we just get a 4 CP Bahamut that has 9k? And well, now we got it again. And all these summons have this theme of like, again, you pay with a bunch of different elements and then they get an additional effect. I kind of wish this one said that it removed it from the game instead, because a lot of the Bahamuts do that, is that when they kill something they exile it, and that last one didn't, and this one it just jumps it to 12,000, which is cool, I guess, but again, usually that Bahamut could take out anything it was targeting anyway and could be cheaper. So yeah, this one I'm just like, what?
Yeah, I think you probably use the Opus 15 Bahamut instead of this basically all of the time. I can't really think of any situations in which you'd want to go to 12k. Like, it's just not that important.
Yep. So this card kind of caught me by surprise simply because I missed that very last line of text when I first read it, that these effects don't end at the end of the turn. So this is an interesting crystal payoff. You can use one to give Ramza haste and make him 9,000 power, and then a second one to give him first strike, brave, and he can attack twice in the same turn. So if you're willing to pay 2, boom. And again, at first I thought, well, that's kind of a cool little burst play, and then I overlooked that last line. It says, well, this is permanent. So if you give him 2 crystals, he permanently has 9k, haste, first strike, brave, and he's going to hit you twice, which is just an awesome beater. He's also a knight too. We got some new knight stuff, so I am kind of excited to try this out in like a Fire Ice knight build, see what I can do to make of those crystals. And he's only at 2 costs, so pretty easy investment. So I like Ramza. He caught me by surprise.
Yeah, I think if you're playing crystal deck and you have fire as an option or as one of your elements, then this is just going to be always on the table as a nice option. Because yeah, if you're playing a crystal deck with fire, then chances are you're also playing, removal like Amaterasu and Brynhilde. And when you're doing those, and potentially Bahamut, I guess. And when you're doing those things, having a forward that can haste and attack twice, that's pretty good. So yeah, I think we'll see Ramza. Is he like the driving force behind any of these decks. Probably not. He's just a nice closer. Those decks are more going to live and die on how well they can produce and use crystals to break apart the opponent's board. And then having this as that closer, just a 2 crystal, convert all of your pent up advantage into lethal. That's going to be a great place for the card. So probably just maybe 2 copies in some of the decks that are going to be abusing crystals.
Excellent. So next we have a new line of backups. These are all 2-cost standard unit multi-playable backups, and they all have a very similar effect. At damage 5, they have an entry effect. If they enter the field at damage 5, break themselves, they'll do something, again, usually related to their element. And what's interesting is that you can dull them to bounce them back to your hand. And I really like this design because my always complaint with backups with entry effects was that, in general, if you're playing a kind of normal game of FFTCG, you want to get your backups down early. You don't want to be playing backups when you're on damage 5. And so they'd make these backup cards that had these damage 5 effects. It's like, well, I don't want to wait till that time. So these cards, you can just slam them down early, and then when the time is right, pull it back to your hand and then replay it for its effect. Or even if you just needed to clear space, you bounce it to pull it back. It'll come down to slots for sure, but I am very interested to test these because they've got some pretty potent effects too. Like similar stuff they've released in the past, this same backup would have said, deal at 4,000 damage. No, this thing removes a forward. It hits it for 10. Yeah. The water one is going to draw you 2 cards. Like they have some good effects on it. So these were quite the surprise.
Yeah, I will talk about the wind one a little more in depth when we get to that one, but these are all quite solid. So the fire one dealing 10k, that's better than Bahamut, and it costs 2 CP. So yeah, these are all pretty good. I kind of expect to see these being played, especially the FFCC ones, because they're searchable by Northstallen.
Next, we have Lunith, who surprisingly was he's only one of the 4. We didn't get a new Refia, Ingus, or Arc, which was very surprising. We saw Lunith. I think a lot of people thought, oh boy, we're getting, new of the 4. And, I've always liked in Warriors of Light those kind of old Opus 5, 3-cost ones that are anthems, but those are, very old at this point. So I was really hoping we'd get a new of the 4. Alas, we just have Lunith. However, he is still quite potent. The fact that he can give any Warrior of Light 1,000 power haste and first strike is quite nice. He can also do an additional nuke, and this is just for moving to attack phase, which is really good if, for example, Ferris wasn't able to completely finish something off through her Ferris chains. Now Lunith can do that as well. So the more I read this card, the more I'm like, ooh, this sounds like a fun Warrior Light thing.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's I think it was a little bit beyond that. So in all fairness, I must disclose beforehand, Lunith is my favorite Warrior of Light, so I do have some personal bias here, but because 3 was the first FF game that I ever played, so I did love Lunith. But anyway, sorry.
No, that's great to hear.
Yeah, great. So this is great for Warriors of Light. Obviously, you get to have your Warrior of Light stuff. Give whatever you want haste. Maybe that'll help you party with and get more crystals with the soul. Maybe you're just going for lethal. So it's good there. It's very cheap. 2 CP, 5k with recurring value. We've seen how good these cards can be. Rydia, it kind of reminds me of Rydia, Palom, Forum. These cards, they do something every turn to generate value, and they're very cheap. So it's really annoying to have to remove them. And I think the Lunith is in that same vein. But the bottom line, it's the bottom half of the text. It's not limited to Warriors of Light. This is just a mono fire card too, I think. So, being able to put Lunith on the board and then just at the start of your attack phase, if you have, 5 backups, you just deal 6k to something, that's really, really good. So I expect to see a lot of this card. Obviously, again, it's one of those cards that really only fits into 2 archetypes. You can't play fire, wind, and then put this card in there and expect it to do a lot of damage. You kind of have to be in Warriors of Light or in mono fire. That being said, in those archetypes, it looks really solid. I could even see, maybe playing one of these in Samurais over the Alua slot or something like that, because it just works so well with what fire wants to do.
Yeah, great point. Great card, and I expect great things from it. Not so great, however, is our other fire legend. This is Luso. And man, I have been burned, no pun intended, by good cards like Rosa and Setzer Crystal last set, where I go through the effort, I do it, here's my 5th cast, whoom, flip over a summon, whoom, flip over a character I've already got. So like mechanically, I'm just kind of against that kind of high rolliness anyway, because it just never works out for me. I'm not the type of player who can get away with that. But beyond that, this card, I'm very surprised that this card has so low attack power. Like, it almost just seems wrong that your opponent can drop a Blaze or a Brynhildr and kill this thing for the amount of you have to invest in. Obviously, the damage 6 effect is incredible, but, you know, most damage 6 effects in this game are only slightly relevant because it's just a very hard condition to meet. So I would love to be wrong about this guy and see him succeed, but he just seems like he's got way too many drawbacks.
Yeah, no, I'm basically 100% on the same page with you here. I think the card is like so close to being good. it's so close. I think if it had 1k more power, then exactly what you said, you know, like it dies to Brynhildr and Blaze and Ace and basically literally anything, you know, fire can put down. A cool breeze, for example, you know. But if it had 1k power, I think, you know, that would be a very different story, and then you would have a much higher chance of getting value. You know, even like 1 or 2 reveals, if you get to play a couple of cards, then, you know, Luso probably did, you know, his job. And I think he could be very good if he had 1k more power, or I think if you didn't have to shuffle your deck before you did the scry, then, you know, you could use some of these scrying effects to kind of, you know, cheat out the card that you want. And I actually thought you could do that, which you can't. But like, if you could do like even like a fire water deck, if you know, stacked the card that you want to play with Leviathan, you could cheat it out with Luso. But because you have to shuffle, that doesn't work. And the damage 6 is so close to being good, but it's a damage 6. So by the time you're at damage 6, like, what are the chances that there's something that you like really want to search out and play with Luso? Because like you've like 15 cards left in your deck probably. So yeah, it's not quite there for me. If it becomes a little more stable somehow, somebody finds some way to make it a nice stable value generator that just doesn't immediately die to Brynhildr, then there's a small chance for this card, but I don't think it's happening.
Yeah, that's fair. So we've got a Knight, Rain, great character from Final Fantasy, Brave Exvius, and this type of card just isn't my style. I don't like the ones where like someone has to die on your turn first before they can come out and get their effect. Yeah, there's little combos you can do, like, oh, I'll put him in Fire Water and I'll Famfrit that way, and the Viking dies, and then drop him and then kill the other. But there's still just so many like conditions and situations for that. 9k on an EX burst is really good, but I just don't like this style of card. I don't like any of them where that's the condition.
Yeah, I think this is like a limited card. It's really quite disappointing that they use this really good rain art on kind of a pack filler card. But yeah, this one is pretty bad.
Excellent. Well, we're all burned up for fire, so let's move on to ice. First, we have Erwin, part of the soiree, so we'll get to that when we get to the big ones in Earth. Next, we have Agrius. This was a nice little surprise. Job Knight and Holy Knight fits in with the tactics theme if you want, but also I really just like her ability that if they target her with anything, they've got to discard. Plus, I don't know if it's a good crystal generator in the sense that she does have to attack, and without that other without her power boost, she's kind of weak, but probably you're going to put her in a deck so she can get that power boost. So maybe a decent crystal generator. Like, on one hand, again, anytime there's a 2CP 5k, I'm like, well, surely it's got to be decently good, right? Because it's just not that expensive to play. But she's not quite a magnet, but I wonder if I'm overrating her a little bit. How do you see Agrius?
I think I'm going to go on a limb here. I think this is the best card in the set.
Wow. All right. Do tell.
Yeah. Okay. So, I think a lot of people are overthinking the Ice Knights thing. They're like, oh yeah, I want to play like Ice Water Knights and, you know, like buff my Agrius and make, because she's a knight, and use it with the last well, which we'll get to later.
Yeah.
But I think, you know, we're just going a little too far there. I'm just gonna say Sarah searches for Ovelia, and then when Ovelia is out, Agrius is a 2CP 9k. And Water also has, you know, the best crystal users. You know, you have Lena, you have Mog 6, and that it just kind of seems like this fits immediately into like an ice water crystal deck. And even if you're not playing ice water, ice has so many ways to use crystals nowadays with the Shantoto, which we'll get to, Cloud of Darkness, and Setzer. I just don't see a world in which this doesn't completely revitalize ice.
Wow.
We will get to Mustadio later again, but yeah, it's the way I'm reading it, it's a 2CP 9K. Sometimes it's only a 2CP 8K, because like if you just play Duke Gultana and search for this, then that's already an 8K, right? So I thoroughly expect that this is basically always a 2CP 8K, and a lot of the times a 2CP 9K, and you can't choose it, or else you've reduced her cost by 2 because you had to discard a card basically.
Yeah.
So I think the only way that you like beat this card is just blocking it, which is just not. That's like the sign of a great card in my opinion. So
wow.
I think that this card is amazing. I think this is basically revitalizing ice. We're gonna see ice crystal decks everywhere. That's what I think.
High marks from Eureka there, dude. I hope you're right. Well, let's see it. So next, kind of not a special one for me, but one of my friends who plays at locals, my good buddy Steven, Vincent is like his favorite Final Fantasy VII character, and we were, he just unfortunately he's never really had like a great card. Like the old Opus 2 Legend was kind of neat. They seem to love sticking specials on Vincent because Vincent just has every special ever. So this one's got another one. His special is very solid, 2K buff. He can't be chosen, and if he's happened to get hit by something like a Susano wipe, it actually doesn't affect him. Really cool. And he's got kind of the prison effect in it, so he comes in and he basically just perma-freezes a backup as long as he's there. Maybe this is being too greedy on my part, but I kind of wish it just said it couldn't be activated, period. All it says is it won't activate during the active phase, so they can still activate it by means of like a new monster we're going to see coming up, or a no-no backup, or a Rosa trigger, any other form they have, Ochis, etc. Yeah. So I do kind of wish it was like, no, he just holds that backup down as long as he's on the field. I don't know. I don't know how to think, because like, okay, maybe turn 1 they go back, or you put down a backup. Turn 2 they have a single backup. You drop the Vincent. Now you're freezing their 1. He kind of reminds me of the old Garland legend from Opus 8, although they got to choose that one. So I don't know. I'm kind of having trouble rating Vincent here. What do you see?
I don't think Vincent is like a standout card. He comes in, he perma-freezes a backup. That's pretty good. I think that's kind of like fine. But he's an odd costed, so you're not playing him on turn 1, so it's like not really an aggro card. So it's kind of hard to see like where Vincent is doing a job that another card can just be doing a little bit better. The S ability obviously very solid, but you're playing ice.
Yeah.
How many Vincents are you realistically going to be playing? It's probably going to be like 1 or maybe 2. So the S ability is just kind of gravy. I think the really unique part about this card is that you can search it with Reeve, the 3CP Lightning EX backup, and you already want to play that in Ice Lightning because it searches for Kate Sith. So I think you're going to see in like Ice Lightning decks just a couple of people incidentally playing Vincent, just because like sometimes when you hit that EX burst, you want to get a forward instead of just 2CP. So I think he kind of fits very nicely into there, even though he's not like particularly powerful. It's just like you already play a tutor for the card, so you might as well put the card in. So yeah, I think it's solid.
Awesome. Right, next we've got the Bard Ice backup. Unless you want to say something, I'll move past that one because it's our...
Yeah, good card.
Moving to our legend, Cloud of Darkness. Okay, so I'm very curious to hear your thoughts on this one. So first things first, I think the art is fine. I appreciate it's colorful. I wasn't as high on it as some people were. I thought it was just kind of like, It's, I don't know. It's just something about her face. Like she's just kind of there for me. I was definitely disappointed by this card just because, again, I kind of struggle to rate crystals, and at least in my experience in playing with them, sometimes you struggle to see crystals early. Now that we've seen the full set, I do see that Ice actually got the most crystal support out of all the elements. Some of them didn't even get it. I don't think like Earth even got any crystal support, but so Ice does have a lot of crystal support. So there's no denying that the effect on its own is incredible if you think of on entry, remove a forward from the game. Oh, and then incidentally, you can't play another one if you happen to have it. That's really good against things like Avalanche or, Vaughn and Sky Pirates, where they do want to keep getting those clouds and those other forwards out. But man, having to tie it to 2 crystals, if you consider crystals to be 2 CP, that means this card kind of costs 7. Like,
yeah.
And the damage ability too just feels tacked on, like they couldn't think of anything else. 2k power, I guess. I don't know. So I was really disappointed by this card. Do you see it any differently?
I think that Agrius just generate and Musadia, who we'll get to later, you're just gonna be generating so many crystals that you probably can just use this effect sometimes. Do I think you're gonna be like using this a lot and like every time you draw this card is it going to be live? You're probably not. But I think you can probably slot in, like 2 of these, and then sometimes you will just be able to cloud and have like more than enough crystals that it's not a big issue. Now, if that doesn't end up being the case, then the card is basically unplayable, and there's no way that we're going to play this card as our like main crystal user. But like I said at the start, when you have a lot of crystals and you have a lot of ways to use crystals, that's when crystals are at their best. And this is a good way to use crystals, as long as it's not the only way to use crystals.
Yeah. All right, I guess we'll see where she falls. Next, we have Black Waltz 1. We'll talk about them when we get to the Lightning Legend. And here we have Shiva. Oh, man, oh, man, oh, man. If this didn't have the restriction on it, I would love this summon. Because if for 4 CP, you could break any doll forward. No more Zalira restrictions of my 4 cost is not targetable. And it makes them discard, like on their turn, be like, yep, break that, and you discard. I would love it. But the discard is tied to that element. So like I'm trying to look at it without that effect. Like if I'm just playing this as an ice summon, is the indiscriminate dull enough at a 4 CP cost, or is that way too expensive? I feel like the discard, you kind of have to have it to justify that cost.
Yeah, no, I think that this is maybe one of the worst ones. So sad
day. All right, next we have Shulk, a very interesting card that just completely freezes the power levels of both your forwards and your opponents, in the sense that yours can only be positive, so yours can only go up, and your opponents can only go down. They can't increase. Comes to mind as a really interesting counter is like against the Twins. They could have 10 counters on them. Shulk comes down and says, actually, you're still just a 4K. That's pretty interesting. And then her special is fantastic. Anything that cancels auto abilities is a premium these days. So, and there are other Shulks too. So in theory, you could run multiple if you really want, and maybe that special is worth it. I've seen with Jack Blocked how much that can be worth running extras. Man, I just wish she wasn't a 6K. The nice thing is she doesn't create a stack with anything she does, so she can't be Amaterasu. So that's kind of my saving grace for her. But I don't know, that body size just kind of worries me. How do you see Shulk?
Yeah, obviously the special is awesome. The passive effects are fine. Like they're nice, but they kind of feel luxurious. And she's only a 3 CP 6K. So like when I think about like what kind of deck do I want to play Shulk in, I just can't think of anything. So the WAF category, there is some like small synergy there. Maybe someday we will see like an Ice Fire WAF come back with Rain, and then this card gets haste, and you want to play the WAF characters anyways. But kind of hard to think about any other decks where you would like really want to put like 6 Shulks in them just for this S ability. So yeah, I don't really expect to see a lot of this card. I will be pleasantly surprised if we do, because I think it's really cool.
Awesome. Well, speaking of cool, so now we have our other ice legend. This is Shantoto. I love this artwork. I really like her face. Like, she just looks so maniacal. Like, yeah, I'm about to drop this on you. So weird to see this card in ice. So I have to admit, when I first read this card, I was very disappointed because, again, mainly because of the crystal thing. However, as you've been talking about crystals now, I'm starting to try to evaluate this in a different light. So it is another payoff for discard in the sense that you get their hand low. She only costs 1. Having a 1 cost come in that gets you back any character from the break zone, pretty good. In particular, I was thinking of in Mono Ice, like, the one card I want to get back over and over again is Physalis. So getting back a Physalis bullet to pew pew. And then her from hand ability, it's like Bahamut 0 as a surprise, except it doesn't target, which is really nice. So what is this, an action ability? So they're basically not going to be canceling this because there's very few canceless reaction abilities. It is a bit expensive. It's going to cost you an ice, a CP, and again, you got to have those crystals. But now that I've seen everything and I see the amount of crystals, I have to admit my opinion on her is going up. And in a crystal deck, I can definitely see the potency of going to attack phase. It's like, yeah, your attack phase is over. I'm just going to dull everything you've got. So tell me about Shantoto.
Yep. I think this card's great. It's kind of like a easy. Besides the very bottom line of text, it's kind of like easy to understand the appeal of all of these. You know, you have a payoff for making your opponent discard. Now this card costs 1, and it's a 1 CP 8K, and you get to get a card back. So it's like very very cheap when you're doing it. You know, the unfair way with your own text. Also, it's a 4 CP 8K and ice that you want to play, which is just fantastic for Alcid. You know, it's just another good thing that you want to Alcid. So you can play
what a great target.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest problems with Alcid up until now was like the only really great target was like Zero Miss and Celeste. So like having these cards these 4 CP cards that get their cost back when they enter the field off of Alcid's ability, that's really strong, and so it works really well in that deck too. Also, you know, just good for mono because you have more discard. Also, I think you'll be playing it in Ice Water Crystals just because you have the crystals for the bottom text. So, yeah, I think the activated hand, it's nigh uncancelable, so you know it's going to be very strong there. I think Dull all 4 as your opponent controls is deceptively strong, not only because it stops your opponent from attacking, but it also lets you attack the next turn. So yeah, I think that this card is absolutely incredible. I don't know how many copies you are going to end up playing in like the settled down list, but I would expect to see like 2 or 3 of these in basically every single ice deck.
Awesome. Well, I hope she lives up to the gargantuan expectation she seems to have. So I know you were high on this one. Now, this next card is one that at least when we were chatting on Discord, I know how much you didn't like this. We'll see if your opinion has changed. This is Scarlet. She hasn't had a card yet. She's from 7. This card is very slow. She won't do anything the turn she's come in. She's got to wait whole turn, and then she has to put a counter on herself and dull, and then she can kind of get one of these effects. And as you get more counters, you get more effects. Correct me, is there a reason to go past 3 counters with her? Will they like double up? So once she gets to 3, she's just going to hit all 3. Okay, gotcha. Yep. But again, she's up 5k, so she dies to pretty much anything your opponent can throw out. I'm not very high on this card. I know you weren't at the time. Has your opinion changed at all?
No, I think this card is really awful. I think maybe the only good thing about this card is that it's 2 CP, Ice, and 7. So there's like a very small niche chance that you could play it in like Cloud Pod. If it's like you already have Yazoo, which has an Enter the Break Zone ability, so it's already better than this in my opinion. But there's a very very small chance you could play like one of these in that deck. Not for its ability really, mostly for its stats and costs. But maybe sometimes when you have like a slow hand, you can kind of cheese out some of these effects. But yeah, this card kind of sucks. I expect to see absolutely none of it, but
yeah. If she didn't have to pay the cost with her dull, I could maybe see a world where like turn 1, you just put her out. They don't have to, and so every turn you just start dulling her to like discard their hand. But yeah, like that's not even efficient. So
yeah.
See you, Scarlet. Next we have Sarah. Funny because I've been playing Ice Discard a lot this last Opus, and I couldn't help but notice. Wait a minute, the Opus 1 Sarah just discards on entry. Why does this one have a condition tied to it? But clearly, if you're playing any kind of like 13 effect, you want to get that second effect too, so that it's draw, you draw and then they discard. And that clearly is superior value to the other Sarah. That said, I won't lie. Sometimes, again, when I've had a bad hand, I've had to go turn 1 back up, turn 2. Well, nothing else to do. Sarah on curve, whereas this Sarah wouldn't trigger for that. So that makes me a little hesitant on it, but I also know how much you like 13, and if you can do the discard and the draw, that obviously sounds really good.
Yeah, I basically think you can basically only put this in your deck if you're like guaranteed to get the draw and the discard. So I think the only place where that's really feasible is Ice Lightning, because you'll have Lumina, so Lumina will search the Sarah, and then because you have Lumina out, Sarah will get the draw, and so you just need to have 2 other Ice characters, so backups or Alcid or whatever it is. I think that's basically the only way that you could really play this card. Now, unfortunately, if you go looking for like other Lightning category 13 cards, it's really just the backup Lightning, because all of the forward Lightnings that are in Lightning right now are just not that playable. So it seems like a good card where you can get all the value. Now, are you gonna have the slots to play this card in that deck? That's where I kind of like don't know. If you do, though, I think it will be good there.
Fair enough. Card that kind of caught me by surprise is this Celis backup, and I was really high on it at first because EX burst, and again, I pictured the perfect scenario as like, oh, you know, turn 1 I put down a backup, turn 2 they've got 2 backups out, now I drop this Celis on curve and it freezes both their backups, cool value. But again, that's if it works out perfectly. Okay, well, what if you see this at a point when they don't care that their backups get frozen or their backups are active, or just like, I don't know. I don't know if I'm overthinking the card at all, but especially at 3, like, I think it'll feel great when it lines up, but how often will it line up, I wonder?
Yeah, it's hard to kind of slot these kinds of backups in your deck. It's obviously solid. Kind of like reminds me of the 3CP Citadel Stein backup. From
Opus 9.
Geez, like Opus 9. Yeah, okay. Kind of reminds me of that, where like, yeah, it's actually just a pretty good card, but how often can you really like enable these cards and put them in over other like normal backups? And the answer is like not very often. So I do think that this is a nice modern interpretation of that kind of backup. Basically, every deck plays backups right now. And wants to use their backups more or less every turn. So I do think there is a chance for Celeste. That being said, I don't see myself slotting this very often.
That's fair. Next, we have a DG Sniper, who, for a standard unit, is actually, I think, surprisingly decent. A Dull Freeze on entry, and then if you have crystals, undiscriminate break on a Dull Forward, so that was surprising. And
yeah, I don't think you're going to slot this card very often, but if you play Popper with crystals, you know, maybe there's something there.
And then we have YKT63. He's the ice version of those Scry monsters. Anything to say on him?
Yeah, it is a nice... obviously, there's a condition on the number of cards your opponent has to have in their hand, but it is a nice, you know, indiscriminate break. That could be potentially relevant. I do think that this one is a lot more playable than the other monsters in the cycle. That being said, do I see myself playing it? Probably not. If there's like a turbo discard kind of deck, then I think this would get slotted in that. But I think we're a far cry away from that.
Next was quite the surprise, which is this Devout backup. You know, you could argue this card costs 0 if you consider a crystal to be 2 CP and a card in their hand to be 2, so you're taking 2 from them and you're getting yourself 2. I was really surprised when I saw this, and I thought, oh, well, there's going to be one of these in every element. No, they just gave it to Ice, which is very surprising. So if you're going for the Ice Crystal thing, I don't see how you don't run this.
Yeah, it looks good. I think whether or not you play it or not is going to come down to like, well, I need to try some games without it and then see how many crystals I have and like whether I'm doing okay or not. If you already have enough crystals without this card, I don't really think you're going to be able to run it unless maybe if it's mono ice, then you would be able to find slots for this. But in like 2-color decks, you're gonna have, you know, backup searchers and color fixers and stuff like that, and it's going to be difficult to slot this card in. That being said, you know, it does line up pretty nicely with a lot of the things that mono ice crystals would be interested in doing. So it might see play there as well.
Next we have Babas, and I was so excited when I read this card because I was like, holy cow, this is incredible. And then I reread it, I was like, wait a minute, no, they put that so. It has such cool effects, and particularly skipping your opponent's main phase 1 and 2. So they legit can draw, activate, attack, and then pass. And then freeze all characters. Awesome. Your opponent has to sack a forward. Awesome. Discard 2 hard. Amazing. Only problem is your opponent gets to choose their effects, and I've said this for Arden and any other card like this, Mirage or whatever that lightning guy was from like Opus 13. Anytime you have a card that lets your opponent pick their effects, they're always going to choose the ones that are the least detrimental for them. And because these are select effects, if they can select them even if they don't meet the conditions. If they have an empty hand, they can say, okay, I select to discard 2 cards. Like, oh, cool art, and it just sucks that your opponent gets to pick them because there's some neat effects on there.
Yeah, I also thought that this card was a you choose, not your opponent chooses when I first read it. And I was like, oh, this card is like Time Walk. This card is awesome. And then we reread the card, and yeah, it all went downhill from there.
Well, That's okay, because next we have a card I'm incredibly excited about. This is Biblos, cool Yoshitaka mono artwork. You know, monsters have been in a weird place in this game, right? And this is one of the few times I've caught myself saying, I think this card benefits from being a monster instead of a forward. I think they really hit an interesting design mark with all these hero monsters.
Yeah.
So anytime your opponent discards, you get to dull freeze one of their forwards. I'm thinking of having Orphan on board. This man's sitting off to the side. You move to their attack phase. Orphan makes him discard. You dull one out of the way. Biblos dull freezes another one. And then when he attacks, he's also going to make him discard. Oh, so that means another dull freeze and another dull. And again, because he's a monster, if this was a forward, your opponents go, cool, remove it, cool, Amaterasu, all that stuff. He's just sitting on the sideline. You want to Amaterasu my monster that won't die to it? By all means, please. Like, I hope this card lives up to the high expectations I have of it. But again, for the first time, I felt like, oh, I actually want this to be a monster. Like, I want it to just sit there and keep generating me that value. So I hope this guy is as cool as I think he is.
Yeah, I think that this card is just going to make it really easy to, swing with your Agrius and whatever. That being said, now I think whether you play like 0, 1, 2, or 3 of these is going to come down to like what the meta looks like. If there's a lot of decks that are like racing each other, and you're in that meta, you're gonna want to play. You're gonna want to like max out on all of these. Dull freeze all their forwards. Now, if my opponent is playing like Mono Wind or something like that, then Biblos seems a little less interesting, just because my opponent's never going to put me to 3 damage, and dull and freezing their stuff is not really as relevant as you would like it to be. You would rather put more of your resources into making them discard. So I don't know how many copies of this actually get slotted into the deck when you're the aggressor, because it depends. Its strength depends a lot on whether your opponent is also coming at you or whether they're playing a defensive game. So if you play against a lot of defensive decks, I see maybe 1 or 2 of these with like a Nagmalata, or maybe even none. If it's like a nice racy meta, then you'll probably play Nagmalata and like 3 of these, because it's just incredible there.
And he can be brought back out of the break zone off of the Sid Waff, because he's got 2 costs. Yeah. That's pretty sweet. Next, we have Heavy Armored Soldier. He's just kind of pack filler, so we'll go past him to Mustadio, who's much more interesting. Cool to see back attack again. That's a keyword that new players always ask me. How come they don't put more back attack on cards? Like, I don't know. I guess I just want to be careful with it. And especially interesting that, again, if they've discarded, which if you're playing Ice, you probably have a very easy way to make them do that, he becomes completely free. So you can just back attack in, kind of similar to the Opus 10 Sephiroth, back attack in dull, and then when he dies, he's going to get you a crystal on the way out. So every line of text on this guy seems pretty thumbs up to me.
Really high on this card. I want to play it alongside Agrius, basically. I think one of the big things that is maybe being underestimated is that just this card existing makes Agrius so much more powerful. Because let's say I play Agrius turn 1 and she's just a 5k. Like, I don't have Ovelia or whatever. She's just a 5k. If my opponent is playing that Agrius, or sorry, let's say my opponent plays Agrius, and then I have Brynhilder in hand, and I want to remove the Agrius. So the Brynhilder versus Agrius is already a 1-for-1, which is not so good. Can I really Brynhilder it if my opponent has Mustadio in hand? Because if I play the Brynhilder, then Agrius triggers, my opponent discards, and since my opponent discarded, my opponent could play Mustadio, and then Agrius will be an 8k. Yeah, so can I really... Yeah, can I ever really just try to kill Agrius with 5k? And I think the answer is no, because if they have Mustadio, you just lose. Like, it's an insane power swap. And just being 0, having back attack, the enter the field and have duel, that's nice. It's just like a nice little bonus there. And then, like, as if he didn't have enough other value when he dies, Inner Crystal. It's like, yeah, this card is just a slam dunk alongside the Agrius for me. I expect to see a lot of this. Yeah, it's truly, truly incredible, I think.
I liked it beforehand. I didn't even think about that combo, man. That's awesome. Great stuff.
Yeah.
Well, we've talked about discard. Talk about another one. This is what Christopher Matisky always wanted to see as Gesper's text way back when he came out in Opus 5. This is Unalesca. And man, I just don't know how to feel about this card. Like, there is plenty of discard effects that don't require you to lose something. So part of me wonders if this is really even necessary. At the same time, you know, I know how potent it was back then with Gesper, but obviously Gesper was a little more unbalanced. This one, you have to lose a card yourself, so there's no way around that. I'm definitely going to try it. I definitely want to put it back there and just see how it feels, but I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if I end up liking it, but I also wouldn't be surprised if I'm like, this hurts me a little too much. I'd rather just make them discard.
This card is a really bad Gesper, but Gesper is really, really good, so maybe this card is actually just good.
Right?
I think that we'll probably see, you know, at the start of the format, ice decks, you know, you play 1 or 2 of this, and then if it turns out, you know, you kind of need a way to guarantee that your opponent is on, you know, 1 or 2 cards in hand, then we will see Unalesca be utilized more just as a nice, not because it's like super efficient. Obviously, it's not that efficient. You kind of go down 1 CP, but it is a way to kind of guarantee that your opponent is going to be at, you know, 1 or 2 cards in hand, especially if it's a Scale Toad, then you can kind of guarantee them to be at 0 or 1 cards in hand. And that does seem pretty important for some like very specific cards, thinking Shantoto, Vicelist, these cards that we've seen be potentially very potent at various points in the game. Now, that being said, like when you are not forcing them down to 0 or 1 cards, you know, they have like 5 cards in hand, activating Unalesca is like throwing like a cup of water onto like a blazing pan fire. It's like, I mean, sure, you know, like it doesn't really solve the problem at that point, and I think that's where it's a little different from Gesper, because it's definitely not free, whereas Gesper was like very, very free.
Yeah. So. Absolutely. So wrapping up Ice with a complete bias on my part. This was my spoiler. This is Laswell, and so I'm totally biased against this card. So Jared will have to set me straight if I'm on the mark on this one at all, but I think this card's great. In particular, it kind of reminds me of like a cheaper updated version of Genesis, Opus 3 Genesis Legend. It dull freezes on entry, and in particular, it dull freezes character, and I think that's huge, is that you could play it turn 1 after you've gone second, dull freeze whatever backup they have, and then it's threatening that, hey, if I attack and live to the end of the turn, you're going to discard. This goes with the Agrius as well, that if she attacks, now you're getting another discard. So I really love this card, but again, I could be totally biased. So Jared, how do you see Laswell?
Oh, I think the card's awesome. I think you're right on the mark. I think it obviously works great with Agrius, because if you play the Laswell first, then when Agrius comes in, you get another dull freeze, and then that'll let you swing with the Laswell, and then I'll make them discard a card. If you play the Agrius first and then you play the Laswell second, then, well, the Agrius is attacking, so you're going to get a discard at the end of the turn. So, I think the card is just... It works so well with the Agrius next to it. I don't think you need to worry about, you know, doing anything fancy, complicated, playing a bunch of knights. I think you just play him by himself and with Agrius, and that's just good.
Yeah, agreed. All right. Well, that's going to wrap it up for Ice. So moving on to Wind, and let's get sucked into this hole that is Atomos, and another hero monster. And man, this card, I actually did a double take when I read it, because I was like, wait, second cast? No, that can't be right. It's like, no. So the second cast you've made, and it already gives you 2 backups, which is just like, I couldn't even begin to process the possibilities of like, okay, so I can put down Atomos, I can put down Rosa, now she gives me 2 back, now whatever I cast next, Rosa's going to reactivate 3, like, obviously, Wind has never had an issue reactivating cards. And then if you get to attack, you just get all your resources back for free. Like, I can't believe it's the second cast. Like, if it was, like, third cast is sometimes a little awkward depending on your hand size and your state. But, man, second cast that's just, like, nothing. Like, this card just seems, it's insane to me. How do you see it?
Yeah, I think this is definitely the best of the hero monster cycle in this set. And if Agrius isn't the best card in the set, then this definitely is. It's very close between those, in my opinion. But this card is amazing. I've actually already played some games on Untap with this card.
Oh, yeah?
It was awesome there. Yeah, it was awesome there. One thing I will say is I thought that you would like play a backup turn 1, and then turn 2 you could like play Atomos and then play, you know, Stiltskin or whatever it is, and then activate and then continue playing. I don't think it actually works quite that well. So I think this card really starts to shine on like turn 3, 4, 5. once you have a few resources already on the board and in your hand, when you have to like just discard a card to play this, it's kind of like losing 2 cards very early. So it kind of starts to pick up once you have a couple of resources on the board already. Whereas cards like Ochu and to a smaller extent, like Asura, those cards are very good from like very early on in the game. Whereas like Atomos is more like Rosa, where it's kind of better after you've already picked up a little bit of steam.
Yeah. Disgusting. I'm sure I'll get destroyed by it many a time.
I will play a lot of this card.
Moving from one great card to the next, we have Wool, the Wind Legend. And at first I was a little not sure how to think of this card just because it's so specific. It specifically wants these big bodies, but it really rewards you if you go all in on this 5 character, and that he can become 1 CP, so he can become incredibly cheap. And then anything that gives protection that just says, yep, they can't be chosen by summons or abilities. And then what's the last one? Yeah, you can draw a card whenever you cast a 5 cost or more. People thought of like the Verstale deck, of course. Granted, that's never really run Win very much. So a few people have played with variants of that. So I don't know if he'd fit in there. And he's interesting. What I kind of like about him is that I do think you at least have to kind of plan around this card. I don't think you can just jam it into any deck ever. Like, you want to have a deck that it's going to benefit from and it's going to protect. But if you get there, ooh, I could see this guy being a pain to deal with.
Yeah. I played a little bit of this card already. I was excited to try it in Mono Wind. Obviously, very good at protecting Bismarck, and protecting Bismarck is a really good way to win the game. That being said, I found it difficult because our other Wind Legend, Cecil, which we'll get to a little bit later, kind of competes for the slot with this card, and you can't really place like 3 of each. It's kind of impossible. So I think if you play this in like a mono Wind deck just to protect Bismarck, kind of not as good as Cecil there. That being said, in Verstale, the card seems absolutely disgusting. I think one of the reasons that Verstale didn't have Wind builds before was because like Fina has kind of gotten outdated. Lock is kind of par for the course nowadays. But you know, if you have this, then Lock obviously becomes a lot easier to cast since you're going to be drawing cards with your wall trigger, and just having like a nice Verstale target that comes out at significantly under his printed mana cost is going to be good. So I do think that this card is really good. Do I expect to see a lot of it in Mono Wind? After playing with the card just a little bit, I think it's a lot worse there than I expected it to be. So I think it's more of a Verstale card.
That's fair. All right, next we have Gargoyle. He's at Run of Monsters. We'll skip past him. Here we have Chocobo Chick, which I didn't really know how to rate at first. However, I wonder if this card is meant to be kind of get up your cast count. Because if you think of if you've got all your backups, or at least 4, he's basically free. Oh, he is free because he's just going to reactivate your backups and he's going to replace himself in hand with the card. And then, again, this is one of those ones that, well, of course, it's a win card. I don't think the multi-element thing really matters. Like, I feel like that's just bonus on this. I feel like you're doing this to get a free cast, to draw a card, and then that sets you up for your lock, your Rosa plays, or whatever. Granted, those decks do already run things like Asura and Chocobo, so will you have the space for the Chocobo check? You tell me.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. This card kind of the whole, if you cast it with multiple elements, then it doesn't matter at all. It's just like blank text. The card is living on dying on like how badly do you need to get your cast count high, and I found it really difficult just making a few deck lists. Like it just seems impossible to ever slot this into your deck, because there's no way you're playing a cast deck that doesn't play Chocobo. There's no way you're playing a cast deck that doesn't play Alexander 1 because that card is just so good in the cast decks. So like this card is competing for slots with like Asura and removal summons like Diabolos 2 or Diabolos 5 or Alexander 4. And I don't think that this card is kind of beating those. Now that being said, there could be, at some point, these cast decks that are just so reliant on cast that someday you're gonna want to play this card just as a 0 CP cantrip, or like if you play it off of Rydia, then it just kind of generates 4 CP for free. It could be good in those potentially, but I don't see it immediately coming out of the gates and doing anything particularly impressive.
Yeah, I think Rosa is our biggest payoff right now for cast count. So if we ever get something that's like, if you cast 8 cards this turn, then maybe Chocobo Chick will show up.
Yeah.
Moving on to probably the most interesting, well, I don't know about most interesting, but just a cool use of crystals is this Charlotta on an EX burst. Her job is Mysterious Woman, but her job should be the Crystal Woman, because when she enters, she gives you a crystal. When she dies, she gives you a crystal. Hey, you don't even want to play her to the field? Throw out of your hand, get a crystal. In particular, that action ability is what makes her interesting for me, because you could put this card in an Ice Fire deck if you wanted to. If it hits a burst, free crystal, and you'll never get CP locked with it. Oh, cool. Pitch it out of my hand. There's a crystal. So that alone, I think, makes her very interesting. I don't know how many people will do that, but just the fact that it's possible, I'm quite curious to see.
Yeah, I think you nailed it, basically. There's no, like, insane, like, crazy math to do with this card. It's like, well, does your deck, like, really need crystals? Because if it does, then you're going to put it in there, you know? I think the other card to, like, look out for using this is the 2CP Kane Legend from the last set. This being a nice guaranteed way to get a crystal on turn 1, along with the other crystal generating backups that are available in, like, you know, wind and, you know, whatever else it is that you want to do. It does seem a little bit more likely that you can just play Kane on turn 1, and if he lives, then you start drawing cards. So
yeah. All right. Anyone who's watching my videos knows how much I don't like 3CP Wind Zidane from Opus 3. Well, I may have found a new Tormentor. This is Zidane from Opus 16. And man, this card just sounds obnoxious. So when he enters or attacks, he's going to steal the top card off your opponent's deck. He can cast it anytime it CP fixes. Yeah, it's not limited to that turn. So once it's removed, it's just like permanently in a bank off to the side that the Zidane player can. The Zidane doesn't have to be on the field still, right? Just as long as he's taken it.
No, it doesn't. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's just this permanent storage bank, which is crazy to me. And then the really crazy part to me is the fact that he can get haste. Normally, haste is there for cards that like don't have an ETB and maybe they have an on attack trigger. It's like, okay, so that's if you give him haste, and then no, this thing can come in, steal the card, turn sideways if you've cast enough, steal another one. Like, honestly, I think the only thing that even prevents this from possibly going crazy is that the 3CP Zidane is still universally just a great card. But man, oh man, this dude is gonna look to run away with it. Also, very weird artwork. I've never seen him in this costume ever before, so I don't know where that's from.
Oh, it's his Tantalus garb, so he's doing the stage play.
Oh, okay, that makes. Oh, okay, so he's the guy at the end. That makes more sense. I was like, wait, when did he have this big moon thing on his head? All right, go ahead.
Yeah, I think this card is awesome. For anybody who plays Magic the Gathering, this is like Ragavan from Modern Horizons 2. And yeah, I think this card is going to be a total terror. I played a whole like whopping 2 games with this card, and it was just great in both of those games. Stole 3 cards like nobody's business. Very, very easy. 3 casts is not a whole lot, obviously, because you have, you know, Rosa and Atomos, and I think it works really well in mono wind when you're playing like a kind of a cast deck. But I also think that this card will be really good in just like random aggro decks, like because if you just play like a wind deck that wants to play like cheap aggressive threats, then you know Zidane, he gets haste, he draws you extra cards by proxy, and he's so cheap that even if your opponent is removing them, like with a Brynhild or whatever, you have probably already drawn at least 1 or 2 cards with him. So, yeah, I think the card is just fantastic. I think you nailed it by saying that the only thing that's really inhibiting this card is that 3CP Zidane is so good that it's kind of hard to give it up. Especially because when you take out 3CP Zidane, it becomes a little harder to protect your Bismarck, and then you have less cards to return to the hand with Bismarck. That being said, I think this card is plenty good enough to be played over the 3CP Zidane if that's what your deck is calling for. So yeah, I expect to see a lot of this card. This is also what I think one of the best cards in the set, probably top 5. Hard to say exactly which one it is, but yeah, I expect to see this card for a very long time. It's very good.
I'll start collecting my tears in a jar so I can just hand him over to the Zidane players. Next we have Siryu. We'll talk about him when we get to Kieran. Theodore, this card was quite a surprise. I had to read it a couple times before I really understood what he did. Because at first I was just like, well, dulling 3-4 characters like to get a break is okay. But then if you choose forwards, he reactivates them in the attack phase. So like, gosh, could you imagine this with like Hooded Man where they activate there? 4 characters are never going dull, baby. And then I didn't catch it at first, but he actually breaks a character of cost 4 or now it does say 4 or more. So that was again a little different. At first I thought it was 4 or less, which is a little more common to hit. This is 4 or higher. Still character, you can get a key backup. You can get one of their forwards like, oh man, four always just gets such good love. However, it is kind of nice to see Theodore get a good card just because I didn't really care for either of his water versions. But, he's green now, so he's looking good to me.
Yeah, I think this card is good. Again, it's kind of falling into the same problem of like, well, can you really play like a mono win deck that just has all of the 4 characters that make this work? And it is a little difficult. That being said, Cecil and Rosa are like so good, and Hooded Man and Edge are also like pretty good. And the Theodore and Hooded Man package works especially well with Bismarck, and then with Cecil on the board protecting the Bismarck and Theodore getting breaks. I do think that there is probably a mono win deck that plays all of these cards. Now, I think that'll be very, very different from, say, the casting mono win deck. So I think we're probably going to see multiple mono win decks set, and Theodore will be part of one of them, and definitely not part of the other one. So
yeah, well, going from the son to the father, we have another win legend, which is Cecil, and I love Cecil as a character. I love his paladin artwork. I love the art on this card. It's gorgeous, and man, oh man. I'm just gonna quote my buddy Steve, who described this card as this is just you put it down and you say, hey, fuck you. This card is ridiculous. Like, first of all, it's not restricted at all. It just plays any 4 cost or less character on a character. So you could put this down turn 1, drop Norstalin off of it. Norstalin searches you something out, and if you play him later and the character you play happens to be 4, it also gives you backup backs. And then it just has this protection effect that taxes your opponent anytime they target, again, characters. So not just your forwards. They try to do something to your backup line. He's like, he's like that meme of that guy going like, I want my taxes right here. Good gravy. Yeah. Get your Amaterassis, folk, because like Vaughn, you need to Amaterassi this thing the moment it comes in. Otherwise, you can join me in the corner as I'm sobbing myself to sleep. What do you think of Cecil?
Yeah, this card is absolutely bonkers. I think you kind of nailed it. The Amaterasu is like the only thing that you can say about this card as a complaint. That being said, you clear the Amaterasu, get past that. This card kind of like solos fire. Basically, they like, well, I have to pay 2 extra to do anything. Basically, it's been absolutely incredible how good it's felt just putting in, like Rosa or like Edge, like 2 drops. You don't even have to go all the way up to 4 with his ability to make him really good. So yeah, I think this card is awesome. I think this is a slam dunk 3 of in basically every win deck going forward. I'm going to be playing a lot of this card over the set.
And just so anyone knows, if you play him with last set's Opus 15 Edge, which can like redirect stuff to Edge, they confirmed this on Twitter. It counts as Edge being chosen or like another choosing. So Cecil will tax them a second time. So you'll get the original Cecil tax, then you'll get a tax redirect into Edge. It's like, disgusting. All right. Next we have the Selkie, 2 cost backup. We kind of talked about those.
Real quick.
Jared wants to mention
I will real quick talk about this one in particular because I think in Wind, even if this card didn't have the damage 5, you could probably play like one of it. So just having a backup that just taps and returns itself to hand, and it's an FFCC 2-drop, I think that's just good. Because you're going to trigger your Bismarcks, you can trigger Leviathan, you can search it off of Norstalin, you can change it out for something later. And then the fact that on damage 5 later, it also becomes Alexander just for 2 is incredible. I think this card is easily the best out of the cycle of these, and I expect to see, most win decks playing, at least 1 or 2 of them just as Norstalin targets that are good generically for most of the set.
That sounds absolutely awful. I hadn't even considered like the Bismarck and the Leviathan implications.
Yeah,
Disgusting. Moving on to some more awesome Amano art. King Tycoon, he's only gotten one card before. So this is basically Opus 1 Valifor on a backup. You just plop him down and you clear the whole field. Really fun main phase 2 effect that, you can swing in with everybody, maybe bait him into think, oh, what's he going to do? And then just you drop him. That being said, that's such a specific effect, and it was pretty prominent on that summon, at least for a while there. I don't know, but again, backups with effects like these, like, because you have to hold an open slot for it, or maybe not if you're using something like the Selkie where you can just clear a slot. So this is one of those ones that, like, I could see it go either way. I could see this be really good and really strong, but I could also see it that it's tough to fit it and it's tough to line it up. So what do you think of our Lord and Liege here?
I've heard a lot about this card, like a lot of opinions about this card on both ends of the spectrum, where people think it's just like, well, you're never going to be able to play this because it's a 5 CP vanilla backup that literally does nothing for your game plan besides, like prolong your death, right? I've heard a lot of people say that this is like the end of times because Wind got a board clear. Oh my god, I think the comparison to Valefor is one that a lot of people have made, and I think it's mostly right, but I think people are kind of discrediting that Valefor is a summon, so like it doesn't take a backup slot, which is huge, and two, a lot of the reason we liked Valefor so much was because it bounced our own stuff too. And I think the other big thing is that like Valefor doesn't choose things, whereas like King Tycoon has to choose things, which is kind of awkward if your opponent has, say, an Agrius on the board, because then you have to discard, and that's not so good. I think the reality behind this card, my take, is that it's kind of somewhere in the middle. I don't think it's the end of times. I do think it is a powerful effect to have access to. So you might consider if aggro starts to become a problem and you're a mono win gamer, you might put one of these in your deck. I do think one cute little interaction that I thought of playing this was you only have to play one of this card in your deck if you play like Lekko. So you can use the Lekko, the one that if you cast a bunch of cards, you get to get more powerful cards from your deck, and then play this during the end phase with Lekko's ability. So it's kind of a surprise. You got a little bit of a surprise factor off of Lekko, and it can't be Amaterasu because it came in the end phase. So I think you maybe you play like one of it and you kind of don't think about it so much, or if people aren't going to be like really aggro and trying to kill you, then you can just skip this card. It's just not a big deal.
Good insight there. I like those a lot. Good points. I hadn't even considered like the choosing and the aggro, so very nice. All right, Here we have Chocobo, which in my opinion is instantly one of the most playable Chocobos we have, because pretty much all of them are just like, hey, party attack and get more power. This one actually has like a recursion effect, which Chocobos never had before, is why they were so good with Stern, because you were happy to just eat all of them. You weren't bringing them back anyway. But this one actually lets you get, again, a character. Like, are the days of forwards gone now? I don't know. Seems like we're just targeting a lot of characters. So if you're playing the Chocobo thing, if you're playing Burbs, you're absolutely slotting this in over some of the other Chocobos.
Yeah, if you're playing Chocobos, this is definitely going in over some of the vanilla Chocobos, basically. That being said, like, does this like revitalize Chocobos? No. But I will say it is absolutely stunning. I think it is disgusting that they planned to make this card when Stern was still legal. I have no idea what they were thinking. But it's a nice upgrade to some of the other Chocobo cards.
What I just heard is I need another card with the word Chocobo in it. So you got it. Chocobo Sam. One of the weirdest characters I thought from the remake. But nonetheless, so he's kind of like somewhat of an updated version of the Fat Chocobo legend from Opus, I think that was 4. He's going to get you a card or job named Chocobo. This one just adds it to your hand, however. He isn't going to play it to the field. So you could argue which one is better there, but he is one cheaper. And then he has an effect. He can buff any forward, and if it happens to be a Chocobo, it'll get 3,000 instead of 1,000. I do think that's kind of expensive, but I can see in a world where they're like, well, we didn't want you to be able to just freely use this, like, they clearly want you to target a Chocobo with it. So, but there are decent Chocobo backups. There's the Opus 12 2-cost one. There's Chocolate. She's still good. I think we got a new one last set too. So he's got plenty of good targets. Not that Win needs backup searching with things like the Norstalin package, but Here's just another thing you can do with it. So
Yeah, I really really like this card. I actually think that this is an instant 3 of in all mono win decks
wow.
because because this can search the 5 CP Fat Chocobo.
Oh yeah.
So that just curves out all of your backups so easily. So if you play this turn 1, you search for the 5 CP Legend Fat Chocobo, and then next turn you play the Fat Chocobo, and then Fat Chocobo gets the Chocolate. So from one backup, you've guaranteed 3 backups and Chocolate, and it all fits on curve. So I think that this card is just awesome. I was thinking about like maybe you don't play Norshal in this set, but I think with Fiona, Althea, Pavlov, and the new Selkie, you play Norshal too. So the kind of ratio that I've been going for is I play 3 Norshal and 3 Chocobo Sam, and I just play 1 Fat Chocobo and 1 Chocolate, and then Chocobo Sam just fixes all of it. And if you happen to draw the Fat Chocobo early, then Chocobo Sam also searches the Chocobo Summon. So yeah, I think that this card is awesome. I expect to see it as the new mono win backup curve.
Talk about more chocobos. Okay, well, we got to give the people what they want. So here's a fat chocobo, but this one's a forward. This is surprising. This card's interesting. So it can't attack or block. It's meant to just be your value generator because at the end of each your turn, you can add a win character. If you're playing it in mono win, that basically says just draw a card. And then it can dull itself to put out backups, and because it can't attack or block, well, what else is it doing? So now you can just start playing a bunch of 2 CP backups, assuming you have them in your hand. He also has a special, which is a great name, but kind of weird. It gives him 10,000 power. I don't know. Maybe you could do some weird deck where you do that with like Hecaton Kyre and then make this massive chocobo, but I'm assuming it's just there to protect him from damage. Man, on one hand, I think this card's kind of busted, but on another hand, I'm like, well, I don't know. Like, I don't know. How do you see Fat Chocobo?
I don't. I thought a lot about this card, and I imagine like you go turn 1 Chocobo Sam, search Fat Chocobo, and then play Fat Chocobo, add a card to your hand, and you can kind of start doing the thing. That being said, what deck does that really work in? Because it can only play win 2 CP backups. So the answer is just like, well, it only works in Chocobos then, right? And so if you're making it in Chocobos, then you're not playing the 4 CP backup at Chocobos. So I don't really know where this is going. It's kind of underwhelming for how restrictive it is. That being said, it does have 2 very powerful effects, so I kind of understand why it wound up where it is.
Yeah, I guess we'll have to see where he falls. Next, we have a ninja who snuck in from Opus 3. This is just pack fodder, so we'll skip right past him. And now we have Fina. Oh man, this card caused a bit of stir when we saw it. When she's on the field, she's just a body who can't be chosen. Okay, but she has this. People referred it to Yu-Gi-Oh! I guess there's things in Yu-Gi-Oh! Called like hand traps, and that's what people thought of when we saw this, is that you can just choose any auto ability triggered from a forward and cancel it, and you can do this just by removing her from your hand from the game. Now, it is limited. You do have to do this with 4 win backups. However, I'm very curious. I wouldn't be surprised to see people try this in Sky Pirates. I've seen a lot of Sky Pirate builds where their only water backup is Tamaj, and the other 4 are wind. So I don't know if they'll try it there. I don't know if this is exclusively you're going to do mono win, but anything that you can surprise from hand, your opponent's trying to drop Sasano on you or Titan, right? Got a board wipe's like, yeah, I don't think so. Bye. And they're playing mono win. Like, you're not used to that. You're used to having to see that he stole on the field. So definitely a scary card.
Yeah. So I think this card is amazing. In Magic the Gathering, this is like Force of Negation or Force of Will. In Yu-Gi-Oh, it's like Ash or Effect Veiler. These cards all have something in common across all games that they come out in. They're all amazing, and I think Fina is no exception. I expect to see a lot of Fina going forward. I do think I'm in the camp that it's basically limited to mono wind because that restriction is too severe. I don't think that the problem with playing it in Sky Pirates is that Sky Pirates doesn't have enough win backups, because they definitely do have enough win backups. I think the problem in Sky Pirates is just that, well, when you play a normal game of Sky Pirates, you don't actually like play 5 backups. You get to like 3 or 4 backups, and then Penelo is just drawing you a bunch of cards, so like your backups don't really matter that much. And because of that, I think Fina is going to be dead a little bit too much of the time in Sky Pirates. I think a good example is like, how many times have you been playing Sky Pirates and your Typhon is actually a forward? It's like, well, maybe 50% of the time is that the case. And so that means that even less of the time is Fina going to be active in that deck, right? So I think if Fina is only going to be playable in that deck like 20% of the time at most, then it's probably not going to end up being worth a slot. So I do think it is hard limited to Mono Wind. That being said, Mono Wind has like 2 or 3 different builds already, and not including Chocobos. So like maybe 4 different ways to play Mono Wind this set. So if you do play it, this is definitely going in there. This card is amazing.
Absolutely. All right, and then we have Pesciota. He's one of the Soiree members. We'll get to them in Earth. Madam M, I believe Jared said he wanted more mono win cards, so here we go. It's EX Burst. If you're mono win, it will always draw you a card. And if you're in mono win, now you're getting your choice. Because again, I kind of like designs like these in the sense that, again, it rewards you for playing mono, and that, well, you could play this in, Earth win, but you're taking that risk. Whereas here, hey, let me reward you a bit. I hope they don't go away from mono cards entirely. It was nice to see them get that little boost in 14. That felt like they forgot about him in 15. So, yeah, this card seems pretty solid.
Yeah, card's good. I think until I have like a really solid handle on exactly what I want to do with my mono win backup lineup, I would say, well, you should probably just play 2 of these, because revealing 4 and searching is not really a backup searcher, but sometimes, it's a Bismarck searcher, sometimes it's a backup searcher, sometimes it's a Ochu searcher, that's just kind of like a good general effect to have in Mono Win, especially because Mono Win can't search for Bismarck, normally, or any of their forwards normally. So I do think this card is really good. Obviously, the EX is just gravy, I think. I think even if this card didn't have EX, it would be playable as like 1 or 2 of. The fact that it has EX just kind of like solidifies it as a nice 2 of in my mind. Also, I had an experience playing and just bouncing this card with Bismarck, and that was just good because like it just helped me find exactly what I needed later. So
very nice. We're going to go check out Yuri now, our Ley Crystal user. When I first read this card, I guess I kind of misread it, or I read over a part. I actually thought it kind of sucked because I thought it could whiff. When you play a win character, it has to be exactly cost 3. It's not 3 or less or 3. It's got to be 3 exactly. But I didn't realize that if you choose not to do that, you can just draw any of the cards you pick from him, so it actually can't whiff. You'll always get something off of him. That said, he's obviously in Amaterasu range, and he does still seem a little pricey at 5. Like, I don't know, maybe we've got all these new mono win cards, so maybe there's room for this guy. It sounds like you've done some testing, but for me, I think he's fine. I would imagine this is one of those ones that comes down to space.
Yeah, I think this is a card that we would have played in Opus 11 or whatever, but it's kind of lost a lot of the luster. I think because it has to be exactly cost 3 to be played to the field, that's just like way too specific. Like, even though there are really good cost 3s in Mono Win, like Rosa and Zidane are probably the big standout ones, and Yashola, you have to like kind of gamble on those being in your top 5, and it doesn't really seem like it'll work out all the time that way. Because if you're just drawing one of those cards, then it's a 3CP 7K that just did nothing on entry, and that's too bad to be playing in standard, I think. Again, one of these cards, this seems like something that could easily see play if there's like an L3 format. It'll probably be good in limited, but in standard, I don't think this is making the cut.
Fair enough. Next we have Lexa, Soiree member. We'll get to those in the next element. So finally for Wind, we have Rosa. And at first I was a little underwhelmed by this card. One, just because Cecil had such gorgeous artwork, and this has got the theater rhythm art, which I'm just kind of like, it's fine. Yeah. And again, the effect is like dull, just give specifically Cecil or Theodora 1,000 power, very motherly of her. But thinking about it too, if your goal is to just have 4 characters for Cecil's effect or whatever, and if you can use her when Cecil comes down, you can keep him alive from Amaterasu. And Cecil's worth keeping alive even if that first effect doesn't go off, because again, now he's protecting your entire board. So the more I read her, the more I like her.
Yeah, I think this card would be obviously slotted in all mono index if it wasn't for the fact that the 3CP Rosa is just so good. It kind of creates a tension there. That being said, I've thought about like the category 4 mono wind deck with Cecil Hoodman, Edge, Theodore, and which Rosa do you play there? Well, since you can't really do a lot of the cast counts, the 3CP Rosa's effectiveness is a lot lower, and you really want to be able to guarantee 4 characters on the field so that you can resolve Theodore's effects. And I think that there's a pretty good case for playing this Rosa in that version of mono wind specifically. That being said, I don't see this one kind of replacing the other Rosa in, say, like cast strategies or like other like general mono wins, just because that one is just so good. But yeah, I think is a great point that you can protect Cecil and Theodore from Amaterasu with this card. That seems like a very potent power line.
Absolutely. Well, folks, that's going to do it for Wind. It blew us away this set, so stick around. We will have part 2 coming up for you shortly. Thank you, Jared, for being here with me to do these.
Yeah, of course.
All right. We'll see you in part 2. Don't go anywhere. Take care.